So, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Betty Stevens. I am the North Nevada Regional Political Director for Elizabeth Warren, and I'm really, really happy that everyone, that you all have come out today to hear from Brandon Wolfe, our guest of honor, and to hear why he's here, his activism, his experiences, especially in the aftermath of the Pulse Nightclub shooting. As well as why he supports Elizabeth Warren and why everybody should go out there and caucus February 22nd if they're not caucusing early, February 15th through February 18th. Thank you. So a little bit about myself before I introduce Brandon. I am a Northern Nevadan, born and raised here in Reno. I've worked in healthcare. I am a student currently finishing up a couple degrees, and so I'll be glad to finish those up. But I worked the Jack Harris the first segment cycle last time around. Shout out to Travis. After that, I went to the legislature. I was the Senate, was the committee manager of the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, and as well as the legislative assistant to State Senator Julia Ratty. And we're currently in her district. She is absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here. She had a football game to watch, but it's okay. But yeah, without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our guest of honor, Brandon Wolfe.
Thank you. I don't know. Am I supposed to sit? I feel like there's a chance that I sit. Is this awkward if I sit? No? Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. This is really surreal for me because if you had asked me what I would be doing 4 years ago, this would certainly not have been it. Everything about my life until 2016 was in every way ordinary. I was absolutely that guy who thought that posting on Facebook was about the equivalent of voting. I was definitely that guy who was more concerned about Instagram followers than who was representing me in the state legislature. And I genuinely didn't feel a responsibility to be involved in the process because I thought that was someone else's job. And life was pretty good. I had, for the first time, a salaried job, so I had job stability. I felt like that was an achievement for me. For the first time since moving out of my parents' house, I had my own apartment. I felt like that was a huge achievement for me. I had a car payment for the first time. I wish I could take that one back. But I really felt like I had arrived. And I had also found for the first time, a place that I felt at home in Orlando, Florida. You see, I grew up in rural Oregon, just outside of Portland. And I distinctly remember that when I graduated high school, there were 2,000 students in the student body population, and 11 of us were black. And so I never really understood as a young person what my identity was supposed to be. I often felt not black enough to be in some spaces, but also not white enough to be in others. And I never once came to understand what it meant to be an LGBTQ person of color while I lived there. Because the only LGBTQ life that I saw was Will and Grace's life, and that really wasn't mine. So when I got to Orlando and I had job security and I had my own apartment, I had really found a piece of myself that I thought was missing. And on top of that, I made the best friends that money cannot buy. I met Drew in 2014, and we became fast friends. We actually met on a blind date. And it was only half blind because I already stalked him on Instagram, and that's the reason that we met. But he finally took my hints, and I asked someone to ask him out for me, and he said yes. So he said we could go on a date. And something you should know about me is that I'm very naturally an introvert, so I've got to really work myself up to be in one-on-one personal situations, especially if there's going to be an attraction involved. So that day, I talked to myself in the mirror. I said, okay, he's going to ask you what your favorite color is. It's green. He's going to ask you what your favorite food is. It's tacos. So I was really prepared for this moment. I get to P.F. Chang's, which is a double whammy because I did not like Chinese food at the time, but I was going to make it through this date. And he came in, we ordered a drink, we were waiting for our table, and he had a martini glass in his hand, and he said, okay, I have a question for you. And I thought, this is the moment I've been waiting for. This is what I prepared for. I'm so ready. And he said, what are your thoughts on the for-profit healthcare industry in this country and its impact on consumers? And I said, green, I think? But then, I'd had a cocktail or two, and so I told him exactly what I thought about the for-profit healthcare industry in this country. And I railed on premiums, and I talked about insurance executives, and then I said, why? Why do you ask? And he said, well, because I work for the for-profit healthcare industry, so I just wasn't sure where this was going tonight. But that was really indicative of who we became as friends, right? He was never afraid to challenge me to think outside what I thought I believed. He was never afraid to demand that I be a better version of myself. And when he met Juan, his partner, in 2015, because Drew and I had become so close, I immediately put those same tests onto Juan. I challenged him every day to show up a better version of himself. And I really, really wanted to dislike him, but darn it, within 20 minutes his giggle had disarmed all of us, and he became a part of the friend group too. And so here I was, living this ordinary life. Job security, I have my own apartment, I have my own car, and I've got the best friends I could have asked for in the entire world. And you flash forward to June of 2016. Everything about June 11th was ordinary. Drew and Juan went to SeaWorld on a date. I think I probably did some laundry. And then it came to the end of the day, and we did what we always did. And that was we met for a drink. Drew and Juan came to my apartment, and I remember we gathered around the kitchen island, and we drank the usual drinks, always just a little stronger than I meant to make them. We listened to the same soundtrack we always did. And when it came time to decide what to do with the night, we almost quite literally flipped a coin. We said, which of our favorite bars is closest? And the answer was Pulse. To be honest, there's a lot about that night that I don't think I'll ever get back, because they're lost behind some traumatic haze. But there are some that are really, really vivid. I remember getting there and the line being really long. I remember it being really busy. I don't speak any Spanish, so it being Latin, I probably should have made me uncomfortable, but I just remember feeling so free, so ordinary with everything. I remember going to the same bartender, Kate, that I always went to. I still go to her, by the way. I remember ordering the same drink I always did. I remember passing the manager of Pulse, his name is Brian, who would always, at the same time of night, just after one too many drinks, ask us if we wanted a shot of Fireball. And so, of course, Drew and I would simultaneously say yes, him, no, me, which means yes, always won. And it won that night, too. I distinctly remember going to the patio and standing in our usual spot. And Drew was a master's degree in clinical psychology, and so when he'd had one or two drinks, he would give you free therapy sessions. What a gift. And so that night's lesson was on love. He talked about love and compassion and treating each other with kindness. And he did this thing where he had these long, gangly arms, and you see it in pictures. He draped them over your shoulder, almost like he was holding himself up, and he would give you the lesson of the day. And that night he draped his arm around my shoulder and he said, you know what we don't say enough in the world is I love you. And I said, okay, come on, seriously, are we doing this right now? We're at the bar, don't get cheesy. And he said, no, I'm serious. The world does not say I love you enough. And not just the people who already know it, but the people who don't know it and need to hear it. That's so vivid to me because it was not very much later that we decided the night needed to come to a close. We were a little too old to be closing the bar. So I was going to step into the bathroom and then we would call our Uber. For some reason, I remember how cold the water from the sink was in the bathroom. I distinctly remember that there was a half-empty cup on the edge of the sink. It seemed like it was going to fall off. I remember very vividly the first sound of gunshots in the club. I didn't know what was happening. There was confusion. I thought maybe there was a malfunction in the music. And then about a dozen people ran into the bathroom with a look on their faces that they had seen the most evil thing you could possibly imagine. I remember there was this smell of blood and smoke that I don't think I will ever get out of my nose. I remember there was a debate in the bathroom with me and that group of 12 people about what do we do? Do we run? Do we hide? The only problem was this was a men's only bathroom, which meant there were no stalls, there were no doors. There was only one option, and that was to try and make it for an exit. And so we locked arms, this group of 12 or 13 strangers, and we ran for an exit I had never used, out of sight of the club I don't think I had ever seen. I didn't really look left, I didn't really look right. I just heard this relentless gunfire in the background as I ran for an open light, hoping that I would get to see my parents one more time. And I was really, really lucky to make it out. The sad part of the story is that Drew and Juan were not so lucky. They were where they always were, in the most ordinary fashion, standing in the middle of the dance floor, underneath the disco ball, holding each other, as if there wasn't anything else in the world except their love. And a man full of hatred and armed with a weapon of war walked in the door and fired 13 rounds into the two of them. I'll be frank that I didn't know what to do anymore. I was facing the reality of life without my best friends. A wedding without best men, birthday parties with empty seats, and I didn't know what life looked like anymore. So I went into hiding for a couple days, and I wasn't sure that I would ever come out. And then by happenstance, the day before Juan's funeral, I turned on the TV for the first time the cable news. It just so happened the channel was Fox, so you know I was up the creek already. And they were talking about Pulse. They were talking about Orlando, but they weren't talking about me. They weren't talking about the victims. They weren't talking about the lines of men wrapped around the building trying to donate blood, but they're not allowed to because they're gay. They weren't talking about the largely Latinx victims whose family members couldn't come forward to ask for help for fear that they would be deported. They weren't talking about our community. They were talking about Donald Trump and how his grotesque tweets about Pulse would impact the 2016 election. They were talking about whether or not we call it a terrorist attack, not about the people of color who were murdered inside. I had a realization in that moment that if nobody stood up and said anything, if nobody did anything, then those 49 victims would die in vain. That they would just be a number, another notch on America's mass shooting belt. And I wasn't going to have that. And so I've spent the last 3.5, almost 4 years refusing to allow Drew and Juan to be 2 of 49. To ensure that nobody ever forgets who they were and how they loved, what they believed in, what those 49 victims were passionate about. But I tell you all this because we're in the same boat today. Donald Trump's administration is waging an all-out assault on the LGBTQ community. At the same time that they're selling tacky LGBT for Trump t-shirts, on sale, by the way, 30% off, they are also kicking transgender people out of homeless shelters. They are ripping foster children away from same-sex couples. They are denying transgender people the right to serve. They are advocating for discrimination against our community in workplaces, in public accommodations, in housing. We are under attack. And we are also at risk of being erased at the same time. We have an obligation as a community to stand up and fight back. We have an obligation to be out and proud. Pride isn't just a party, it's a protest. It's to say we're not going anywhere. It's to say that we deserve better from our leaders. That's why moments like this one really, really matter. It might just feel like a gaggle of friends with my favorite food, deviled eggs. But it's more than that. It's a gaggle of friends. It is a community of people who have come together and said we are going to do more to change what our future looks like. So we're going to have some fun today. It's not going to be sad the whole time, I promise. We're going to have some fun today, but I want you to keep in the back of your mind throughout all of it that we have an obligation to do more. We are obligated to Drew, to Juan, to the 47 other victims, to their families, to show up louder and prouder than we ever have, to be represented, to have a seat at the table, and to never stop living proudly. So I'm very excited to be here. I know that we're going to do some questions and things like that.
Yes.
But thank you for having me. Thank you for welcoming me. I am so excited to be about it. Yeah, no, I don't. I actually think it's our interpretation of the Second Amendment that's out of date. So I think that what we need is people who are confident to stand up against the barrage of messaging that we've heard from the gun lobby and the NRA, right? They make a lot of money for us to continue to shoot each other in the streets. And they'd like us to believe that we can't do anything about that. But the reality is that the Supreme Court has already weighed on this several times. They've already said that the Second Amendment is not limitless. They've already said that things like Black Hawk helicopters and nuclear weapons are things that can be regulated. They've already said that fully automatic weapons are things that can be regulated. Those are heavily regulated in the United States. What we need are politicians in a position of power that are willing to push back against the rhetoric of the extreme right wing. They're willing to push back against the moneyed interests of the NRA, and they're willing to have a genuine dialogue about our culture of violence and our easy access to firearms in this country. I think if we had the right conversation with the right leaders in place, the Second Amendment would not bar us from putting reasonable regulation on people's right to own a firearm.
I would definitely agree that I don't think the issue is us getting rid of or repealing or replacing the Second Amendment. It really is, to Brandon's point, our interpretation. So making sure that when we're talking people's right to arm themselves, it doesn't include being able to stockpile unlimited amounts of ammunition. Like, that's wholly irresponsible. And so Senator Warren, she really wants to put forth a series of different reforms to make sure that we're having a responsible conversation around gun safety and gun laws in this country.
And I think just the last part, I'm really passionate about this issue, if you can't tell. I think the last part is, it's important to remember that all of the things that Senator Warren has put forward, and really the gun violence prevention movement in general, are widely accepted by the American people. They're very popular, right? So background checks, universal background checks are supported by 98% of Americans. Red flag laws are somewhere between 65 and 70% of Americans. 60% of Americans believe we need a ban on assault weapons in this country. These things are popular in America. We do not have, I think, an American psyche problem around changing gun safety legislation in this country. We have an elected official problem And that largely means we need to repeal and replace those elected officials first.
Being a survivor of a nightclub shooting, is there things that you believe bars or clubs, like do you now go somewhere and think, okay, if they don't have this in place, I don't feel comfortable going in?
Yeah, I do.
Because there are certain laws, they're trying to have laws that certain things, we should have doormen all the time or this or that, or, you know, or it's up to the nightclub and state to state. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and one that needs to be had, one that's being had in Orlando right now, because there are some in the community, I think, who argue that the owner of Pulse may bear some responsibility because of lack of security. I'll tell you that in Orlando, I know the spots that are safe and are not. I don't feel particularly comfortable going to one particular club that does not have door people, does not have wands, and doesn't really check anybody coming in and out. It also has about 12 entrances around it. So it's very, in my mind, porous and unsafe for people, and I typically don't go there. But I do think it's an important conversation that we should be having around what responsibility do venue owners hold, right, to keep people safe? And where does that lie in terms of the government, and then where does that also lie in terms of us as business patrons saying we're only going to, go to businesses that respect our values and our interests. That includes businesses that are pro-equality, that includes businesses that, that we feel are safe and are protecting our community. So I think we each play a role in what that looks like. I think, we could have a conversation about policy in terms of that, but I also think that we play a responsibility in our communities in rewarding business owners who are good to our community as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. So right now we're going to go to our first drag performance of the afternoon. I want to introduce to you Bella Desmore. Thank you so much. So it was really, really important to me to do an event like this because making sure that all marginalized communities, especially LGBTQ+ communities, are at the table and part of the discussion is something that's really, really important to me. And so I was really thankful that we were able to do this with Queens for War event back in August. And so when I reached out to Dustin and Tyler to do this again, I was so thankful that they were on board. So so appreciative to be able to do this a second time.
What did I sign up for right there?
So I just wanted to say big thank you to Dustin for helping put this together, and big shout out to Tyler and Emerson for creating this event, for allowing us this space. So I hear there's a drink called the Wolfe on the menu. Absolutely, we'll make sure that happens. Absolutely. So, to continue the program, I want to introduce Brandon back onto the stage to continue talking about activism, to really talk about the need to make sure that everybody is engaged and involved. Living in Trump's America, especially when you're part of this community, is really harrowing. And so making sure that we are staying focused, staying engaged, and really staying inspired to keep doing the work that needs to be done. So with that, Brandon.
Okay, so I talked about what I did, right? I shared with you my story. But what I think is more important is what happens next for you in Nevada. I am so jealous of Nevada, by the way, because our primary is so late. It's like we don't get any candidates, we don't get any of this stuff. So that's why I'm here, because I'm just going to move to Nevada. But it really does matter, right? You think about how far away politics felt for me. And 2016 was the first time I really got engaged. And I probably was very clumsy at it. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I showed up, right? Because I had to. I felt that if I didn't, that my community wouldn't be represented in a presidential election that really, really mattered. And so I did. And I knocked on doors, and I helped elect a congresswoman, and I fought for a senator, and I worked really, really hard to elect Hillary Clinton President of the United States of America, and had my heart broken. I will never forget that day. I don't think many people will. I was at a party, of course, it was at the Hillary party, and I had already I brought my suit, I had my button, I already had an interview lined up, I was going to talk about Hillary's America. And then the results started to come in, and it became very clear that it was not going to be Hillary's America. It was going to be Trump's dystopia instead. So I went home, and I crawled under the covers, and I didn't come out for probably 36 hours. I did come out for whiskey once or twice, but outside of that, I was done. That was it. I'd waited my entire life to be involved in politics only to be crapped on by Donald Trump. And then my boss called. And at the time I was working for Starbucks. I was a district manager with them, so I was managing about 13 stores in Orlando. My boss, our regional director, called and he said, "I'm not going to judge you, but I'm going to guess you are still laying in your bed. And it's like 36 hours after the election." And I said, "You would be correct in guessing that. I am." And he said, "You gotta get out of bed." And I said, "I don't understand what there is to live for. We lost. We worked really hard. And instead America put a racist, misogynist pig in the White House. Why do I get out of bed?" And he said, "Because people need hope. People need something to believe in. And if all you do is show up with a smile on your face and you get back to work for 2018 and you get back to work for 2020, people will have hope." What happens after we leave today is really important. Because I'll go back to Florida, where our primary is seemingly in September, and you all will have a real opportunity to make a difference, to make a change. I think about the 2020 election like this. We're all really afraid. that Donald Trump will win again. We can just say that out loud. We are terrified that Donald Trump will beat us in 2020.
Yes.
And for many of us, that is coloring what we're doing to make sure that doesn't happen right now. We're running scared. And what does that mean? That means that Donald Trump, right here, right now, is dictating the Democratic primary process. He's deciding who we feel comfortable voting for based on who will beat him. He's deciding when and where we show up based on what feels comfortable for us. But we can't allow that to happen. The 2020 Democratic primary is not about Donald Trump. It's about the America that we're going to be once we evict him in 2020. And it reminds me a lot of Pulse, to be honest. Because Pulse was intended to scare us. That was the intent of a man who walked into that club filled with hatred for people who were not like himself and opened fire. He wanted us to go back into the closet. He wanted us to be afraid to be out and proud. And that was a real